Hi everyone, this is the LAIIER Partner Series where we're excited to host some of our amazing partners and learn more about IoT solutions, LoRaWAN, smart buildings, and why sustainable solutions are really important. Today's guest is Tom Ferguson, managing partner at Burnt Island Ventures, and we're going to discuss all about water tech and how Burnt Island finds the best entrepreneurs in water.
Really very kind of you to have me. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Thanks for joining. So, Tom, can you share a few more details about what does Burnt Island Ventures do? What is the focus
Sure.
of your job and your role as well?
Yeah, sure. So the job is very simple, and like a lot of investing, it's simple but not easy. Our job is to find, fund, and support the best water entrepreneurs globally. So the best people building companies in the world, our job is to find them, convince them to take our money, and then be as useful as we possibly can after that check hits the bank. The reason we're doing this is because water is the secret that hides in plain sight. So it's obviously, we call it the fundamental molecule that allows society to exist. We also say that climate change is water change. This is the medium through which water is going to be, the medium through which climate change is going to be experienced. It's also the fundamental part of people's lives, for everything from having a shower to turning on the tap to having a dishwasher to whatever. And then also very pertinent to what LAIIER are up to, like when water goes wrong, it is spectacularly annoying, right? It's really, really, really bad. Anyway, we invest across the uses of water, everything from leak detection and management all the way to utility dispatch software, to zero liquid discharge for industrials, to membrane treatment, to the smart guys who have re-engineered the sprinkler from the ground up. Whatever the intervention in the water sector is within our purview. And we think we've done quite a good job of finding the best water entrepreneurs for our investments in Fund One. And yes, Matt, I am looking at you.
Oh, that's very flattering. In fact, I have a challenging follow-up question for you.
Good.
So obviously I believe, and everyone at LAIIER believes in how critically important water is. In fact, one could say that we are all 2/3 water. But why are you so forward thinking? Because the stat that I constantly see is that something in 2021, 50+ billion was invested in climate tech and 500 million went into water. So why is everyone else missing the point? And why has Burnt Island spotted it?
So, because we're really smart. No, I'm kidding. So I'm going to start from the last point first. Basically, the rest of climate tech are incredibly busy. There's an effervescent amount of entrepreneurial activity going on in climate tech. Thank God we are finally running something like just 1 second, I'm going to unplug my thing. I think weird things are happening. We're finally seeing something like the amount of experiments that we would need to see in climate being run. Unfortunately, the people who are providing the capital in order to fund those experiments understand an awful lot about everything from mobility to fission to conveyance to storage to whatever, and none of them know anything about water. None, basically. We've had well over 100 calls now with people who are kind of starting to look over the fence from basically a lot of other climate tech funds, because they put a water droplet on slide 7 of their pitch deck and then they don't do anything about it. Water just goes onto the too hard pile along with 99.2% of the stuff that they see, because it's not within the circle of competence of people who are providing capital at the moment. And that sucks, because sometimes they get to yes, but that's all they can do. Because if they get far enough to make the investment, it's very difficult for them to be useful kind of after the fact, right? So that's a little bit about why it's kind of been a little bit about why it's been overlooked. But why are we doing it? And it's really down to differentiated information. So I spent 5.5 years at an accelerator called Imagine H2O, running the accelerator programs. I saw 2,500 early stage water companies, worked with 130 of the best water founders in the world. And what I saw was that suddenly there was a critical mass of really, really smart founders coming into water to solve problems. And actually, previously, that hadn't been the case. When seed investors were around, there weren't enough targets, really, to responsibly say, like, okay, now we have like more than just 15 or 20 as we're looking to put into fund one, 20 people where we can't miss anyone. There are now enough smart people that we can miss some and still build an awesome portfolio of opportunities on behalf of our LPs. And so it's just down to the information. We were just there when we saw that inflection point, which everybody else would have missed because no one else has looked at 2,500 water companies over the previous 5.5 years. It's just, you know, that's what allowed us to see it.
I have so many follow-up questions, but I'm going to let Dimitra lead the charge.
Yeah. Okay, what's the ideal water company for Burnt Island then?
Yeah, so we have a slightly trite version on our website called the Burnt Island 5, but we sort of prefer to boil it down even further. So we think a lot of venture investors are searching for product market fit. I'm giving the game away. Searching for product market fit. That's what you're trying to get to, because after product market fit, you can scale, and then big company, and lots of good things happen for a lot of people. Our job as an early investor is to look for the leading indicators of product market fit. And our experience in water tells us that one of the most important parts of that is founder market fit. So one of the things that we really like is people who kind of wander on out of the undergrowth with a faraway look in their eye, having experienced the problem that they are trying to solve for the previous 10 years, and they couldn't build a product that market didn't want if they tried. They know exactly who they're selling to. They know what the channels are. They know exactly what the value proposition is. They know exactly the language to use to describe it. They know the trade shows to go to. They've already got a Rolodex, etc. It's a huge set of unfair advantages of people who have lived the problem that they are solving. But then there's a second group, and this is one that I would put Matt in. But actually, Matt and the team had a really interesting overlap in both sides of things. Is people who have done the work. Like we say that bad things happen in the gap between the understanding of the reality of the market and the actual reality of the market. The reason why radical founder market fit is helpful is that there is no gap. And then when we met Matt and Bibi and the team, it was very, very clear that through their decade of dirt under the fingernails working with this technology, they had looked at an awful lot of markets, and they really understood an awful lot of markets, right? And so not only do they know where they're going to go first with the LAIIER product, they also know where second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth is. And so they, through like just bloody minded legwork in the market, right, they've got to this appreciation of what the market is. And so that's one of the things that we really like. The second thing we look for is good entrepreneurial process. So like we choose good people because good people make better risk-adjusted decisions, right? And the best kind of breadcrumbs of the better risk-adjusted decisions, which in terms of risk adjustment, you get to better outcomes, is like, how have you thought about your progress thus far? Like, what can you show about your decision-making resume that makes me think like, actually, these people are thinking about things in the right way. And they're not going to go and do dumb stuff like read blitzscaling and then try and just sort of spend their way out of a whole bunch of market problems. Like, we're not interested in the classic kind of like mode of overall venture building, unless, of course, when the time is fully right. And then there are things that really, really count, like storytelling. People usually use the word charisma, but I find that's kind of slightly, it has a slightly pejorative connotation, potentially unfairly. Like storytelling is really important. Communication is really important. And people say, oh yeah, for investors. No, not for investors. For hiring, for your first customer sales, especially when they're founder led. And then somewhere about 3 stories below us is investors. Like, you know, there's an old adage that those who tell the stories rule the world. That's actually a Native American proverb and a paraphrase of a quote from Plato. It's as close as it gets to a universal truth. And that's something that's very, very hard to teach. Anyway, I encourage everybody to go and look at the Burnt Island 5 on our website, but those are the things that I think are kind of like really on our mind at the moment.
Okay, I do have like a follow-up. So you meet like all these companies and people, and then you have like to make like the decision who's like actually the best to invest on. Okay, what's now your outlook on companies building water tech, and why is this a growing space, you think?
There aren't many other industries where there is $1 trillion of current CapEx and OpEx spend that when you actually look at it, you say, wow, there is a lot of work to do. There is a lot of work to do. This is everything from whatever, the like water conveyance systems, so pipes basically in California leaking at a rate of about 20%. So every gallon that gets treated, or every 5 gallons that gets treated, 1 gallon gets spat out of the pipe on the way to, which is insane, obviously, because of the Colorado River. There's a conversation about actually whether or not it's a good business, which is a whole different thing. Underground pipes are a tricky overall thing. This is a gargantuan market with problems coming out of its ears, which is a place that's actually quite good to compete, because there are a whole bunch of legacy solutions or non-existent solutions. I'll say more about that in just a second. A whole bunch of legacy solutions that are the kind of thing that I would want to compete against. You are also going through a really interesting turning point in the water market, in that a lot of people who have been working in it have been working in it for quite a long time. The water business has been very, very bad at attracting talent, and a lot of it is aging out. And with that opens up a whole load of opportunities, especially on the digital side of things. The last thing I'll say is that, because once you have a giant market with a load of problems and you have like lots of smart people coming to build companies to go and solve those problems, good things happen. Everyone always complains about water and says it's regulated and cheap and slow, and like good founders figure it out. And we've got literally 17 examples in our portfolio at the moment. We're really happy with the progress of all of the companies. But the other thing to bear in mind is kind of what is commonly referred to as the Uber effect, which is, there's a classic study by an NYU business school professor called Damodaran, who basically massively underestimated Uber's market size. He said it was going to be, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something like small, like 274 million or something weird, because he just thought it was just the taxis, right? Rather than what happens to the market when a company comes in with a fundamentally different cost basis, and then the world reacts to that. What are the second order effects in terms of the market size? And we see this all over the place. Like LAIIER is one of them, and there are multiple ways in which LAIIER is going to change the size of the leak detection market, because it's not just leak detection, it's monitoring, it's security, it's insurance, it's the whole thing, right? Zilpa trenchless, we exited last year. They are fundamentally changing the size of the trenchless technology market, because it's a different cost basis, totally different performance possibilities. Zwitterco, membranes that like are doing things that membranes shouldn't be able to do. Doppler, like nobody's spending time on automated like information ingestion and triage and then automated dispatch, but they will be once they understand how powerful Doppler is. Like all of these companies, yours included, change the size of the markets that they are in by virtue of their existence. And that's really, really, really powerful.
So I have a follow-up, Dimitra, if that's all right. Okay. So I definitely agree the idea that companies can change the size of their market. And I also agree that water represents a huge amount of untapped opportunity. I think entrepreneurs are, I don't want to say like fickle with what they focus on sometimes, right? So they're also driven by trends, and what they think they can serve might be influenced by outside effects. Do you think that that climate change, or the reporting of climate change, impacts how many people are building water companies? Meaning that if we have a crazy hot summer, are we going to see a bunch of water? Are you going to have a stronger deal flow by December? Or if we have a really rainy summer, are you like
Yeah.
how do you see that? And will that also change other VCs' view of it?
It's very funny. Okay, so the visibility of water issues is definitely impacting the kind of the demand for like what's going on in water from the rest of the VC market. No question, right? Everything from floods in like China and Europe to droughts in China and Europe and the US and the Colorado River. Like, what the hell is going on with it's like everything's a mess, and it's so much more obviously a mess than it's ever been before. And that's triggering kind of people who think about meta trends and like whatever, which often can get them into trouble. There is something you bring to mind, something that I think is really, really worth thinking about, which is the drought attention cycle. So I moved to California in 2014, in the kind of the midst of this, like what was then a pretty epochal drought. This most recent one made that look like kind of child's play. But like when it starts getting dry, they go, "Oh, I'm getting interested." Well, wow, I'm getting really interested. Oh my God, it hasn't rained for ages. Really are interested. Oh my God, it's rained. I don't care anymore. And then you do that over and over again, right? In terms of just like whether or not this is something that will play politically, like etc. I actually think we're slightly past that. I think that there's a confluence of things happening that is going to make this fundamentally unignorable. And we said this the other day in a newsletter with the FT, is that like they're going to get it sooner or they're going to get it later, but at some stage everybody's going to get it, because climate change is water change. Like that's it. We've baked a certain amount of climate change into our future. Like our experience of water is going to get really heavy. And what we're trying to do is to make sure that the worst effects of that don't happen, rather than doing what the slightly cheesy like hedge fund crew or whatever are doing, which is investing in water rights and betting on the Mad Max future. We're like the opposite side of that trade. Go directly to your question. Marissa, there's something you and I should probably do, which is find out exactly what the determinants of people who are building companies. But I must say, it's quite rare. So Megan at 120 water, what's more common is I want to safeguard water for my kids, which is much more of a long-termist thing, rather than like we should get involved in stuff in water. And again, like I like the evangelists, and the evangelists can be sticky, but you've got to marry the evangelism with real knowledge, whether that's hard won, or whether it's something that, well, it's all a hard one, but whether it's coming in from the outside and really rolling up your sleeves and doing the work, or that you've worked in some kind of problem space. Like evangelism is kind of not enough. So maybe we'll see an explosion. And actually we've seen a kind of like a constant uptick of people getting in touch with us over the last, over quarter by quarter since we started this 2.5 years ago. But I think there's a healthy mix of people who are looking at the fundamentals of it as a business versus like, wow, it got dry in northern Spain or whatever, and I'm going to go and try and do something about it. But I think it's time for the Great Water Entrepreneur Survey, which includes the question, so why the hell did you start this thing? Select the box, which we haven't actually done yet.
I think that's a really interesting point about the balance between pragmatic entrepreneurial opportunity and deeply held beliefs or concerns about the future of the climate. Because I grew up in Colorado. Water was always on the agenda. It's always been on the agenda. And I was always aware of the concept of water rights and seniority and water rights and the complexities of that. And never felt like there was an opportunity for me to respond to that until we realized, oh, LAIIER has a potentially direct contribution to make towards water saving and mitigating the costs of water damage. And only when we did that analysis did we realize that there's a real economic opportunity in doing that now. And there's for me, a very personal and deeply held belief. But I think coverage in the news of water actually drives our customers' awareness more than anything else. So if it's dry, our customers will pick up the phone faster.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think the coverage in the news, I mean, again, we should probably do a Google Trends or whatever, but just like from essentially a qualitative but pretty objective view of it. is that it's never been more obvious. So the top story on The Guardian yesterday was yet another story about PFAS, right? The northeastern PFAS states were sort of really accelerating the deployment of PFAS regulation. And for those of you watching, if you haven't looked up PFAS, long chain fluorinated compounds, PFAS, go and look them up and then support everybody's efforts to do something about it, because we've poisoned the world and it sucks. But the visibility of these issues is something that has happened, I think, relatively organically, and it's not before time. And it's one of my biggest criticisms of the sector, actually, is that the sector is populated by like current present company definitely excluded, but like really, really smart, extremely dedicated, very, very humble, very hardworking, like brilliant professionals who do an unbelievable job silently. They never talk about what they're doing. The water sector is absolute garbage at communicating like what we do. This is like, can you imagine how you would feel if you went to your like sink in the morning and turned on the tap and nothing happened? You went to flush your toilet, nothing happened. Your priorities for that day change fast. The story is asking to be told, and we're crap at it, and it drives me nuts.
Well, whoever runs the water utility on our Mars colony is going to be an extremely important and popular person.
Yeah, but this is everyone always says, like, let's look at Singapore, let's look at Israel. Okay, right, in Israel's case, like, they've done a phenomenal job, absolutely brilliant. Size of New Jersey, water is 10 times the price. They have a single utility, there are 150,000 in the US, and it's an existential threat. Underneath those conditions, and it's almost exactly the same in Singapore. They've got even less groundwater resources in even fewer less quantities. I think we're going even less groundwater resources in Singapore. Underneath those conditions, you'd be like, of course you manage water absolutely amazingly. So on a Mars colony, yeah, that person's going to have some. The Mars colony water manager is going to have some serious cash out.
Okay, then I have one more question. I promise, Dimitri, I'm going to let you get back to your questions. So that the institutional humility in the industry is, I think, what you were describing. I'm
going to borrow that.
Do you see that? Okay. Do you see that reflected in founders as well?
I think humility is a really, really important characteristic of founders anyway. I think people who are overly bullish about anything scare the crap out of me, because the world is really complicated. Like, and we know nothing in terms of our individual experience. It accounts for very, 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 very little of actually what is going on. And so humility in the face of vast risk, I think, is one of the best entrepreneurial traits that we can look for. And actually, that's a bit of a difficulty, because often, like, bastards build quite good companies. But one of our kind of core values is that we have a very, very strict no asshole policy. Mainly, I think, because people, like really tricky people, find it quite difficult to get on in water, because it is a very kind of like relationship and network driven industry. I think that I think you need to I think the best way to characterize what I think people should be going for is a quiet confidence, in that when you know enough to figure out everything from the incentive structure to the buying patterns to the likely position of pricing to exactly what your value proposition is, the product, in order to deliver that value proposition, you're confident in your market size, you're confident in your differentiation. When you've done the work, you actually don't need the bluster. You don't need, there's nothing like the quiet presentation of an argument that makes an absolute boatload of sense, right? And it's a really effective sales tactic. I mean, Tyler from Ziptility was talking about this yesterday, is that, like, it's like, I don't know, anti-sale, which is that, like, look, I'm not going to pressure you into doing this. This is what did it happen for XYZ people. These were the outcomes. Like, we think this has got like a real job to do. We think this is relevant for you now. This might be relevant for you later, but we're not going to talk about that. We'd much rather you experience it and that, rather than let's go. Let's do this thing. It's going to be great. Your life's going to be like, your life is going to be like daiquiris and fireworks for the ever, you know, and all of this like nonsense. You don't need it. I just had this experience the other day with a group that were just like, it's the classic problem of like, look, we've got the pipeline to do 125 million in sales next week, and this is going to be great, and it's going to be a lot fantastic, and we've got like a gazillion partnerships lined up, and like everything is going to be like super awesome. And I've got a list of things as long as my arm that is wrong with their argument, right? Everything. Just, it's actually more effective to not be this kind of all singing, all dancing evangelist, because anybody I think who really has an appreciation of reality, I guess, really understands that. I mean, sometimes think you're a total slam dunk and the confidence is warranted and never say never and like all the rest of it. But like good risk-adjusted decision-making over time is the best determinant of whether or not you get to where you want to go in terms of building a company. And overly bullish people, I don't think they're really in the business of making good risk-adjusted decisions. They're good risk takers, and sometimes that works out. But that also explains a lot of why 85% of venture-backed companies fail, because a lot of it is just like, yeah, for the moon, and then they just sort of plow into the hillside, and it's all terrible. But yeah, it's an interesting one. But that's a style thing. But I think this is just sort of what I prefer. I prefer people who are careful.
That's awesome. There are some really good nuggets in there that we could talk about for ages. I want to give it back to Dimitri because I'm mindful of time.
Dimitri.
That was great because you kind of like answered pretty much all the questions, but I do have like a couple more. Like, okay, what is like a big challenge for you right now? Like, I don't know, like in the water industry.
You want a list?
Or like finding the right partners.
I think the biggest challenge, this is going to sound really weird, right? Because it's a little bit like the awful interview question where it's like, what are your weaknesses? And says, I work too hard and I care too much, you know. One of the biggest challenges is actually delivering on our value proposition. Like if you think about venture as a product, right? The sort of core of it is cash, which is, I mean, the whole point of it is that it's a commodity. It's totally indefensible. Like water is actually venture is actually quite a stupid business. Like really what helps you build an edge and build you differentiation that makes Matt more likely to take my check versus someone else's, which is my job, is what I want Matt to do, is to take my check versus someone else's, is a delivery on our overall value proposition. And our value proposition is that we are not just a check, that we are really going to make a discernible difference in the trajectory of the company. And we just hired a second partner yesterday. She's a wonderful person called Christine Boyle. She's been working with, I've been working with her for a very, very long time. I've actually met her about 2 weeks before we started in water. Marissa's done an extraordinary job on platform. We're going to be hiring Jenny Graham on the investment associate side of things. We're opening our bandwidth. But 17 companies is a lot to look after. And frankly, we haven't systematized in the way that I would want to be able to get my network out of my head, to get the connections out of my head, to be able to like really allow all of us to work in a relatively automated way, to be able to give the founders the leg up on everything from cultural development to sales to marketing to like whatever it is. I think I found it really challenging to build that engine to deliver the value proposition. I think we've done fine. The feedback from the founders is pretty good. I think the feedback from the LPs has been pretty good. Like that's fine, but that has definitely been pretty difficult. On the water side of things, in terms of what's on the mind, I mean, I don't really like, one of the things we always say is there's something pretty tricky about the 2.1 billion slide, which happens less now, but it happens probably 20% of the time, is that the slide 2 on someone's slide deck is 2.1 billion people don't have access to safe water and sanitation, which is a human tragedy and is totally useless for startup building. Totally useless. Like this kind of like meta on down, which is like, that's a problem. I want to go and much better to start from micro pain points and then build up from there to get to that thing. In the same way, I'm wary of starting with something that is too meta. But of the really, really big stuff, like Bill Gates is really rich, and he's found it very, very difficult to solve the sanitation problem. This is really hard, but it is a gargantuan market. And the person who solves it will almost certainly win a Nobel Peace Prize and be crazily rich, because well, everybody goes to the bathroom, right? And so we're actively looking for stuff like that. In terms of the meta problem, one thing that really does play on my mind is that 70% of the world's population lives in coastal communities. And we don't know quite how much sea level rise is going to happen, but it's not good news. Not only in terms of population displacement, but in terms of the salination of coastal aquifers. We're going to have to get good at reuse really fast. So we're thinking about that a lot. Overdrawing of groundwater resources. These are bank accounts that fill up very slowly, even slower than my own. Yeah, so you really need to look after them, and the data on them is terrible, absolutely awful. I saw a lady from Microsoft, a wonderful lady called Eliza Roberts, do a brief presentation on this at UN Water Week as part of the UN CEO Water Mandate, and it was hilarious because everybody uses the WRI tool. Oh, no shade on the WRI tool; they use freely available data. It just happens that the freely available data is wrong consistently, and not hilariously, and tragically wrong. Mercifully, I think there's a kind of a route out of it. And then there's the stuff that doesn't make any sense, like pumps. We haven't really moved on much in pumps in a really, really long time. Like cooling towers are absolutely everywhere and make no sense. They just transfer water into air and just throw it out the top of a building. This is crazy. So yeah, the list of things that we're interested in is very, very wrong, very, very long. But actually, what we're really interested in is the founders, because problems aren't enough, products aren't enough. You only get to where you need to be in our business is when the company is built and people build companies. And so you've got to start with people.
Good. And I thought that we were the only one struggling with value proposition. So it's so good to hear.
It's really hard to encapsulate it. It's really hard to encapsulate. It's like one of these things that you feel like it should be right there, and it takes hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. Like the amount of time, there's the simplicity to complexity and time curve. It's like usually done in kind of like teaching. This is a Feynman idea from physics, I think, is that like the complexity of the complexity of the explanation goes in line with your understanding of in line with the rising understanding of the problem. But once you really understand the problem, the complexity of the explanation reverses. Yeah. So by the time you really get it, it's really simple. And it's just the hard yards. It's the hard yards. You have to do it in terms of the markets. Yeah. I
think that the last thing the thing you were saying about building companies, that is, I was like, and scene. That was such a succinct way to put it, right? That it is about the market, and it's about the approach, but in the end, it's like, actually, it's just about, can you build the company, live long enough, execute long enough.
Everybody always spends the time thinking about, is this the product that's going to do it? Like, I mean, how many motor cars were there around, like, before the Model T? Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
Like
lots.
Like lots. VHS versus Betamax. Betamax, clearly the better product. Like there's the old adage that the first time founders focus on product, second time founders focus on distribution. That's it. You know, it's like these are the product is not enough. Product is just a medium for the delivery of value proposition. Company that you build around it is going to be the difference between success and failure. And people spend too much time looking for product. Product has to be there, but it's not everything. You're actually really lucky in that the product you have is exceptional, like really good. And it's really great to be building companies around exceptional products. So like my congratulations to you and all the team at LAIIER for the work that you do. We're so unbelievably grateful and excited to be a tiny, tiny part of it.
Well, I was not going to get in your way of complimenting us. Thank you, Tom. That's very nice. You know what? I know that we're done because we have to be done. But I do think that point about first-time founders focus on product and second-time focus on distribution. I reflect on that personally I think that rings personally true. First time was like,
Yeah.
hey, this thing is cool. I'm
Yeah.
gonna go find people who also think this thing is
Yeah.
cool. And then the second time it was like, I can make a lot of cool things and I'm sure I can find people who like them. But what's much more interesting is figuring out how to get useful things to lots of people in an efficient way.
Yeah, exactly. Because if a thing's cool and it can do cool stuff, it's totally irrelevant unless it gets into the hands of people, right? It's the same
Yeah.
issue often with impact investing. Is the people are like, I want to have that area, which is great, which is fine. But the promised impact is irrelevant if people can't actually build a company of size, which is all about just a business nuts and bolts. Like the impact is not enough. You need to have people building companies like you're doing.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you,
Really
Marissa.
appreciate you having
Thank
me.
you.
And yeah,
That was
like
great.
good luck with everything, and we'll speak to you very soon.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks.
All the best.
Okay, bye.
Bye.